Rent control is about to reach the ballot box. In less than 2 weeks, California voters will decide on Prop 10, which would loosen state regulations on local rent control laws. More than $20 million have been spent on campaign contributions for Prop 10. KTvu teamed up with San Francisco-based By the Bay to go through those ads you're seeing. Heather Holmes helps us break down the claims.
And vote yes on 10. That's why veterans say no on 10.
Prop 10 is a repeal of Costa-Hawkins, which is a state law that prevents cities from regulating the rent on homes built after 1995.
Prop 10 allows a lot of local cities to be able to implement rent control again.
The measure is backed by several groups, including the California Democratic Party, the American Civil Liberties Union, and several labor organizations.
A simple measure empowering your local community to take on skyrocketing rent and predatory housing practices.
The Yes on 10 pro-rent control campaign says the measure is limited and won't solve California's housing problems, but provides local governments the ability to address the issue their way. Our expert says that argument is straightforward and true.
This would be a statewide mandate that basically empowers cities to implement rent control wherever they see fit.
The No on 10 campaign argues that the measure does not include protections for renters and takes away incentives for landlords to maintain and improve their properties.
And Prop 10 will make housing more expensive and harder to find.
The campaign also claims the measure would reduce home values for middle-class families.
That's not necessarily true. That's presuming that cities do implement rent control. So the caveat here to note is that cities may or may not.
All right, joining us now to discuss this issue more, Proposition 10, that is, Proposition 10 supporter Ken Trey. You're with the United Educators of San Francisco.
Yeah, I am.
Appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks very much.
And an opponent of Proposition 10, Matt Regan from the Bay Area Council. Appreciate your time today and for coming in to discuss all of this. We'll start with you, Ken. How is it that you believe Proposition 10 is going to help those renters who may be struggling with the high cost of housing here in California?
Yeah, Prop 10 is actually a pretty simple, basic measure. It simply allows communities to make their own decisions on the kind of protections needed to keep folks in affordable housing. So it's a key component to the crisis of housing affordability and, by the way, the homeless situation that we're facing in San Francisco and other communities in the city. It will not only regulate how high the rent increases could go, it allows landlords a fair return on their investment. So I've taught American democracy for many years, and Prop 10 simply allows communities to weigh in democratic discourse and decide what is best for their communities. Prop 10 is one of the components to solve the housing crisis that we're facing, both in school communities and in the communities surrounding the Bay Area.
Okay. Matt, I mean, we've seen the ads in opposition to Proposition 10. They say if this passes, it will worsen California's housing crisis. How so?
Well, we agree with that premise, and let me agree with Ken. I mean, there is a housing crisis in California, and it's most acute here in the Bay Area, and that's driven by primarily a lack of production. We create about 8 jobs for every new housing unit that we permit here in the Bay Area, and that math just doesn't add up. At the end of the day, that drives up costs, drives up prices, and drives people out of their homes. Rent control seems like a good idea, but every economist in the United States almost unanimously agrees that when you apply price controls, rent controls to this housing market, over the long term, it will result in less affordability. It will harm more people than it will actually help.
If it passes, it would repeal Costa-Hawkins, and it would simply open the door to the possibility of local cities putting rent control rules in place. Why not let those local municipalities make that decision?
Well, the authors of Costa-Hawkins understood that applying rent control to new construction would make it less feasible to build new apartments. They understood and they believed the economics, they believed the experts and the economists, which is why they put that in the state law in 1995. If you give cities the opportunity to repeal that and apply rent control to new construction, it's going to be much more difficult to build new housing. And some cities are opposed to new housing. Let's be frank. Some cities are good actors and want to build housing. Right here in Oakland is a great example of that. But other cities are not so supportive of new housing. If you give them price controls on top of the zoning controls they already have, it's going to be incredibly difficult to build the homes that we desperately need.
Okay, Ken, how about that? I mean, you know, the notion that if Prop 10 passes and you put these price caps in place, you might deter new home construction?
Look, there's all sorts of speculation about the economics of housing. One thing we know for sure during this housing crisis, which the streets of San Francisco are full of homeless folks, and I'll tell you what, in our school communities, the anxiety in the teacher's lunchroom, the housing insecurity, we surveyed our teachers recently, and 70% of the teachers discussed their housing anxiety, which could be maybe they want to grow a family and simply can't afford here. Maybe they're facing eviction. When I started teaching in '85, you would not have heard any of that. So we know one thing that works is rent control to keep people in their homes. And by the way, all the economic experts cited, not one of them spotted the housing collapse of 2008, which precipitated what we're experiencing now. One thing we know for sure, rent control works to keep people in their homes. Of course, we got to build more housing and seek other parts of the solution. But let's not base our decisions on idle speculation. Let's let voters in their own communities decide using the democratic process.
Matt, what is the evidence that repealing Costa-Hawkins is going to discourage new home development?
Well, there are laws of economics, not theories. And one law of economics is that price controls result in shortages. I mean, that's a non-negotiable in economics. And I'll use Angus Deaton, who's a Nobel laureate economist, who won his Nobel Prize for the study of the causes of poverty. He is a firm believer that applying rent controls over the long term result in less affordability for poor people. So you can say it's not okay to ignore the experts and the science on climate change, but somehow people seem to believe it's okay to ignore the experts and the science on rent control. I disagree with that premise.
You know, when I taught high school economics, we'd say that economists were as good as weather people in understanding why we had a weather crisis or event. They weren't so good at predicting it. We do know that my best teaching friend, Charlie Hibbard, who was voted best teacher at Galileo High School so many times that they passed a rule that no teacher could do that more than 2 years in a row. We seduced him over to Lowell High School. He won Best Teacher of the Year award. He's in his retirement years, and he and his wife facing eviction from a speculative landlord. Where is he living? Minneapolis, St. Paul. That we know. We got to build more housing. We got to do more for the homeless crisis.
Ken, one final pitch to the voters. Why should they vote in favor of Prop 10?
To stabilize our working families community.
Okay.
San Francisco is facing radical gentrification. The economists in charge of Sacramento haven't been able to prevent that.
Final word, Matt.
Well, I mean, I would say that Prop 10 hasn't even passed yet, and it's already dampening housing market construction.
Okay. All right.
We have one member who's a lender who was working on a project in the South Bay and pulled the plug on it because they couldn't be guaranteed the rents.
Thank you both for coming in. Appreciate the discussion. We're going to end it right there. Our coverage of Thursday Night Football starts right after this break.
All right. Hey, good one.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in. Appreciate it.
Big dialysis corporations are spending millions